Welcome back. Our last topic in the integumentary system is going to be looking at some disorders. We're going to look at skin cancer and burns, two things that affect the skin. So the first thing we're going to talk about is skin cancer. Um, so this is a major disease of the integumentary system. We know that the sun has significant effects on the skin. This picture is of a truck driver who, over the course of his career, this half of his face was consistently facing the window, while this half of his face was away from the window. So the UV light was hitting this side and not this. So you can see that there are significant structural changes that happen to the skin in response to UV radiation. So when we talk about the effect of UV radiation on the skin, we can talk about the effect on the dermis, we can talk about the effect on the epidermis. Pretty much every part of it is going to be affected here. So skin cancer is prevalent. We've got over 5 million cases per year. About 1 in every 5 Americans is where we're sitting right now. So what happens to the skin in response to UV radiation is, first of all, you get what are called thymine dimers. So your DNA, we talked before about cancer and said that cancer is at its heart always a genetic disease. So the mutation that is induced here is that your two thymines sitting next to each other form a bond between each other. And then that creates a kink in your DNA that is going to, if it's not properly read and proofread and fixed, is going to create mutations down the line. So that's one of the things that happens. We get suppression of your tumor suppressor genes. So the brakes on the cell cycle, those genes are going to be inactivated. And we get the activation of what's called the FAST protein. This is an executioner protein. It causes cell death. So none of this is good news for the skin. We know that UV radiation damages the skin. Pretty much, there's no such thing as healthy tans. A tan is a response to DNA damage. Any darkening of your skin means that your skin is calling out for help and it's responding. Your melanocytes are responding by making more melanin, which makes your skin darker. Anytime your skin darkens, it is going to be in response to damage. Now, there are certainly pigmentations that are more likely to get skin cancer. The less melanin you have, the lighter your skin, the more likely, the more susceptible. But it doesn't matter. Every single person is susceptible to skin cancer. People who have very dark skin tend to get skin cancer on their palms and the soles of their feet. So everyone is susceptible to skin cancer. So basal cell carcinoma is the first type, and it is the most common and the least deadly. Very common in elderly white males. So it affects the stratum basal. It's found in areas that are constantly exposed to the sun, so the tips of your ears, on your nose, the tops of your hands, the tops of your knees if you sit outside all the time. This has a decent cure rate. We can surgically remove it. That being said, the removal is deep. So it's not just taking it off the surface of the skin. They're going way down into the dermis to get clear margins, and often does leave a significant scar behind when it is excised. Squamous cell carcinoma is going to be second most common. This one tends to spread. You know, basal cell doesn't really spread. This one does. And it requires more extensive treatment. We usually need to follow up with radiation after a surgery, and the surgery tends to take more tissue with it. So while we can remove a lot of these surgically, you're removing the skin. And so there definitely is a significant scar or disfigurement that's left behind when you take the skin cancer out. Melanoma is the most deadly version of skin cancer. It affects your melanocytes. It's highly metastatic, so the melanocytes are in the stratum basale and it busts through that so easily and begins to spread. It's highly resistant to our treatments. We don't have good treatments for it. Currently, somebody dies every hour from melanoma. The really shocking part of melanoma is that over the last 30 or so, maybe 30, 40 years, the incidence is up 800% in young females and 400% in young males. So that is a huge, monumental increase that does not correspond to a monumental increase in the intensity of the sun. So in other words, the intensity of the sun has not gone up 800%. These numbers reflect indoor tanning. They reflect what happens when you go to tanning beds, which we're going to talk about here. This is the most common cancer in 25 to 29-year-olds and the second most common cancer in 15 to 29-year-olds. Once you've had more than 5 sunburns in your life, your risk of having melanoma more than doubles. So that's huge. On the plus side, if you wear SPF every day, it decreases the chance of melanoma by like 50%. So, there's things that you can do on the positive side if you've already had these sunburns, because a lot of people get 5 sunburns while they're a child. So indoor tanning is really the major culprit here and what is responsible for these shocking increases in melanoma. This is roughly about a $5 billion a year industry. So the people who are invested in this don't want this information to get out. This is similar to like what happened with cigarettes, where, the cigarette companies knew that this was dangerous. They knew people shouldn't be doing it, but they wanted to keep the information under wraps for as long as possible. So currently, the World Health Organization is classifying indoor tanning beds as a group 1 carcinogen. So essentially the same group as plutonium. It is something that we know causes cancer. The FDA in the United States classifies them as a class 2 medical device. So there's moderate risk is what they're saying. That is a big difference, and this $5 billion a year lobby is the difference between these two things. There's no reason that one organization would classify it as a group 1 carcinogen and the other says, it's a moderate risk. It's a definite risk. So you can see all of these statistics here that you're dramatically increasing your chance of melanoma by going to a tanning bed once. And every time you add another visit on, you are just increasing that risk and increasing it and increasing it. There is no good reason to go to a tanning bed. None. I don't care if you think you're going on spring break and you quote unquote want to get a base tan. There is no reason to go to a tanning bed. A tanning bed removes all of the protective environment and ozone that allows life on this planet to exist. We have an ozone layer around the planet that protects us from the UV radiation of the sun. Otherwise, the planet would fry to a crisp. When you go lay in a tanning bed, it's like grabbing the sun and bringing it 6 inches from your body. You have zero protection, and it is killing people. It is literally killing people. That crazy high increase, the 800% increase, the 400% increase, it's not because the sun suddenly got brighter, that there was more UV radiation. And people want to talk about, well, the hole in the ozone layer. First of all, the hole in the ozone layer is over Antarctica. So unless you were laying out in Antarctica, this doesn't apply. And it's fixing itself. So this is a direct correlation to indoor tanning. There is no reason that they should go. Some states have finally started putting some laws on the books that say that if you're under 18, you have to have a parent's permission. There are countries like Brazil who have outlawed indoor tanning completely. So um, this is this is a big deal, and hopefully we are going to come around to understanding the significant consequences. There are billions of dollars each year spent to help treat people who have skin cancer due to indoor tanning. So, melanomas. We have an ABCD rule when we are looking at any type of growths on the skin to determine if they need to be looked at for melanoma. The first would be if it has an asymmetric border or the border is irregular. So if it's not symmetric on both sides and there's irregularities to the line, that would be an issue. Color is something to look at. Generally, melanoma tends to be dark blackish brownish, but it can be red, it can be pink, it can be flesh colored. But generally speaking, they tend to be darker. And certainly, if you're somebody who has a lot of growths, something like a mole, which is a high pigmentation on it, that can be where melanoma starts. This can be a perfectly normal mole for years and years and years, and then boom, becomes cancerous. So you want to have them checked out. If you're somebody who has a lot of growths, you want to have them checked out yearly by a dermatologist where they look at each and every growth and determine if there were any changes to it. So one of the things to look at is, did the color change? And then finally, diameter. Anything bigger than 6 millimeters, which is basically, think about the eraser on the end of a pencil. Anything bigger than that definitely needs to be checked out. So when you're looking at the growths on skin, you want to apply these four different components to it. So the next thing is kind of related. It's burns. So this is caused by heat, electricity, radiation, which is what we were just talking about, UV radiation, or chemicals. Okay. When we have burns, our primary threat is going to be the loss of fluid. Remember that your skin is a waterproof barrier. So when your skin is damaged and you begin to leak out fluid, you're going to have significant problems with your blood pressure. So number one that we're dealing with when we have somebody who has critical burns is that we need to get a line in them and get some fluid going. The second is infection. Your skin is keeping the outside from going in and all of the possible pathogens out there. So we need to monitor for infection. But first we got to get a line in. So loss of blood pressure is going to kill you before an infection does. So we have to kind of follow the most critical issue there. So when we look at burns, we have partial thickness burns and full thickness burns. Partial means that you're basically just dealing with the epidermis like a sunburn, or the epidermis and some of the dermis. Okay, these are first and secondary burns. Generally, a first degree is not going to have any sort of blistering associated with it. It'll be very painful, very red, very inflamed, but it's not going to blister. Blistering is usually involved with second degree burns, again, incredibly painful. Full thickness or third degree burns go all the way through the dermis down to the subcutaneous tissue, and they tend to not be significantly painful because the nerves are gone. So the nerves are completely destroyed, and so the pain aspect of it is not there. So we would tend to say that we have critical life-threatening burns if you're talking about more than 25% of the body with a second degree, 10% of the body with a third degree, or if the face, hands, or feet are involved. The percentages can be very quickly determined by using what's called the rule of nines. Basically, the entire body is going to be divided into something that is divisible or is a multiplier by 9. So your whole head and neck is 9%, 4.5 for front, 4.5 for back. Each arm is 9%, anterior, posterior, 4.5. The anterior trunk is 18%, posterior is 18%, so that gives you 36%. Each leg is 18%, so your lower limbs are 36, and then the perineum is your last 1%. So this allows you to very quickly look at somebody and determine the level of involvement when it comes to critical burns. Now, we are really bad with fixing burns, particularly when we're talking about really severe ones like these two. The tissue is destroyed so badly that when it does scar over, generally the scarring tends to be painful. It tends to contract. It tends to be really heavy, thick, contracted skin. We've done a lot of research on skin substitutes and things like that, and are getting better at it. But burns are still really, really tricky to deal with.